Hey guys, I know I shouldn't say guys. I have to stop saying guys, but I say it all the time, and it's so hard for me to not say guys, especially when I'm just saying hello. Hey guys, hi guys, what's up? I'm going to stop saying that, but I just don't know what I'm going to say because y'all, hey y'all, I mean, I like that. It sounds really friendly. It sounds really nice. It's just that I'm from Boston and I've never heard that expression growing up, so it's not natural for me. It's like something from a movie where somebody's pretending to be the southerner, and so they say y'all, y'all, y'all. That's what I feel like I'm doing when I try to say y'all. So I tried folks, hey folks, but people who are in your generation don't know what the heck that is. Like, I said it to my kids and they were like, folks? Folks? What is that? Okay, so I will resolve my issue with how to address an audience at some point, I promise. But for now, we're back talking about verb phrases, and we have only two more types to talk about. So let's talk about those two types. The fifth type of verb phrase that we find in English is what we call a complex verb phrase. Complex verb phrase. A complex verb phrase is when you have the verb followed by two specific things. So it's the verb followed by a direct object plus an object complement. And you're thinking, okay, what's an object complement? We haven't defined that yet. Well, an object complement is going to be very similar to a subject complement. Remember, the subject complement goes back to the subject. So in the same way, an object complement goes back to the object. So if you have a sentence like, the residents voted Peter president. The residents voted Peter president. And we think first, okay, subject and predicate. Subject of our sentence is going to be the residents. They're the ones doing the voting. And then we have this predicate, voted Peter president. Voted is serving as the main verb. We have Peter here, and we have president. Peter is the direct object. Why? Because Peter is receiving the action of voting. So Peter is the direct object because it's the direct complement of the verb voted. But when we think about president, president is now not referring to someone else other than Peter. It's actually telling you about Peter. So it's like as if you have the intensive verb phrase and you say Peter is the president. Okay, so Peter is the subject, is the main verb. The president is going back to Peter. So it's telling you something about that subject. Therefore, that would be intensive. And you have the same thing, but just with respect to the direct object, not the subject. So this is what we call complex. You have the direct object and an object complement. The direct object and something that tells you about the direct object. So another example would be, I consider her movies funny. So you can have many different types of expressions occur as an object complement. You could have something like funny, which is an adjective, right? It's modifying the noun. But you can also have a noun itself, because here we have president. So it's not the case that when you have an object complement, you always have a particular syntactic category. You can have a mix. And what are you going to do then? You're going to always rely on what is that phrase doing in that sentence? What is it added to the meaning? So I consider her movies funny. Basically, you're saying her movies are funny. Funny is describing her movies. This is what I think. right? I think that it is the case that her movies are funny. So that's a tip then, that you have an object complement. Whenever you have something where a direct object is showing up and then you have something that goes back to it, it's always going to be the object complement, and the type of verb phrase that you're going to have is going to be complex. So let's look at our very last and final verb phrase type, which is prepositional. Okay, so prepositional, remember we said that the monotransitive type of verb phrase, that's very common. We find many, many instances of monotransitive verbs in English. And if you were thinking about what would be a less common type of verb phrase, this is probably the least common type of verb phrase. So you're not going to run into it as frequently, and hence there's really just a small group of verbs in English that work this way. So if you take a look at the chapter in the reading, Analyzing English Sentences, they give you an example of a list of verbs. Those are all of the verbs of English that are prepositional, right? You wouldn't be able to do that for monotransitive verbs because the list would be like the size of a dictionary. So let's think about what is going on here. You have a verb plus what we're calling the prepositional complement, or PC for short. What is a prepositional complement? Well, it's something that always is a prepositional phrase. So the prepositional complement necessarily is required because that particular verb says, I need to have a preposition following me. I can't just have a noun phrase. So if you look at Fred glanced at the statistics, and you say, okay, Fred's my subject, glanced at the statistics is my verb phrase. What's going on inside the verb phrase? I have my main verb, glanced, and then I've got this at the statistics. Well, you might think to yourself, maybe this is a direct object, right? It's receiving the action of glancing. But we know that the direct object is always a noun phrase. Always and only a noun phrase. We do have a noun phrase here, the statistics, but you can't say in English, Fred glanced the statistics. You know, if you could say it, you would know what it means. It would mean Fred glanced at the statistics, but you just can't say it that way. You have to include that item at, because glance is what we call a prepositional verb phrase. Okay, so certain verbs like glance, you have the verb look, right? So in many languages, the way that you would translate this, the verb look, is that it's not prepositional. You don't have to have a prepositional phrase following it. You can just have it taking a direct object, a noun phrase. And so if you're a speaker of a language that works that way, it can be difficult when you're learning English to realize that the meaning of the verb look is the same as the meaning of the verb look in your first language, but it requires that prepositional complement. So you say the teacher looked at the exam. And what you would expect to find among students who are learning English as a second language is that if in their language the equivalent form would be something like the teacher looked the exam, they would produce sentences like that in English because it makes sense, right? The exam is the thing getting looked at. It's just that in English you need to have the look and the at. And if somebody tried to ask you to explain, okay, but what is the at doing here? And what is the at doing here with the statistics? Or you could say look up the exam. We have many other examples other than at. These two just happen to have at. But if you tried to, determine, the meaning of the word at is there because it's at a particular location or it's as a, there is no way to do that. Prepositional verbs do not have an internal meaning that you can understand. So, for example, when you say, I looked up his address, I looked up his address. You can't say, I looked his address. It doesn't work like that. But when you say, I looked up his address, does it mean I looked up? His address is up here? It doesn't have that meaning. Up has nothing to do with the meaning of looking up somebody's address, searching through a book or searching through something in your phone, right? So don't make the mistake of thinking that in every single construction in English, every preposition is going to carry the same meaning. Typically, when you use at in a sentence, it's telling you about location, right? We were at the party. The location was the party. That makes sense. And that will typically be the way that if you're learning English as a second language, you will learn the meaning of at. You don't learn the meaning of at from looking at examples like Fred glanced at the statistics, because it really doesn't have any meaning of location in that example. Or the teacher looked at the exam. The at is only there because English says, I require what follows me to be a prepositional complement. It's a prepositional verb phrase, and I have to have a preposition following me. So as I mentioned, these are few and far between in English. If you look at the list that they give in the chapter where they talk about the different types of verb phrases, you're going to find that most of them are listed there. And when you're looking through the list, just sort of go through the languages that you're familiar with, and you're going to see that in many examples, what gets expressed as a prepositional complement verb in English is expressed as, let's say, a monotransitive verb in another language. That is completely expected. So the idea is that these verb classes are going to be relevant for English, and then if you were looking at another language, you would really need to sort of sit back and look at the structure of that language. First, you have to think to yourself, okay, where's the subject in the sentence? Maybe it's at the beginning, like English, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's at the end. Maybe it's in the middle. Where's the verb? Maybe it's after the subject, like English, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's at the beginning, right? So if you were looking at a language other than English, you would have to establish all of the basic facts about the language that we have been talking about with respect to English.